That was a long 10 seconds. Welcome to our December 18, 2012 study session for the Gilbert Town Council. I've had a chance as we were getting situated to find out the specific agenda items the group would like to talk about, except Councilmember Daniels. Did you have some items you wanted to discuss? As you look, the first part for Thursday night, Councilmember Peterson will coordinate the scouts and leaves with that. We do not have other presentations and proclamations except for an oath of office that I will administer.
5 and 6.
5 and 6, okay, great. So 5 meaning now our 22A. Let's go ahead and begin then with our study session agenda item number 1, which is to review for Thursday night, and we will begin with number 4.
Mayor, that was mine, and I did actually get my questions answered, so I don't need it unless someone else does. Sorry.
Okay. As a council, do we feel like we're ready on number 4? It's our water agreement with the White Mountain Apache Tribe. Okay. And I realize that 5 is off the consent calendar and moved to 22A. We could talk about it now. Let's talk about it now. Rip Vilan.
Okay. Mayor, we don't have a presentation prepared, but I'd be more than happy to recap the Rivulon agreement.
Give us a recap, and then we'll see what questions the council has.
Okay. For Thursday night, when you have before you a development agreement negotiated between the town of Gilbert and Nationwide Realty Investment for the Rivulon project, which is located roughly at the intersection of Gilbert and Pecos Road, Lindsay, and the 202. They don't own all of that acreage. They own the majority of it. It's roughly 263 acres in size. The proposed development will contain 3.1 million square feet of office space, 500,000 square feet of retail space, and at least 250 hotel rooms. The gist of the deal is that Nationwide has bargained to put together an agreement with the town whereby they would put the infrastructure in ahead of schedule to create some pad-ready sites at the location to accommodate at least 250,000 square feet of office commercial use at all times. They will also construct a 120,000 square foot office building right at the corner of Gilbert Road and the 202, which Gilbert would then have available to market for existing large users looking for relocations and expansions. Rivulon or Nationwide would have the opportunity through the recapture of transaction privilege taxes up to $35 million in infrastructure costs that they would put into the site to make it pad ready for development. The term of the agreement would be over 20 years. It is tied, the office space in particular is tied to the reimbursement. The majority of the opportunity for reimbursement would come through the transaction privilege taxes that would be generated through retail establishments. The Nationwide, the way the agreement is structured, in order for Nationwide to recoup any of those funds towards eligible public infrastructure, they first have to complete the 120,000 square foot office building. They then, any funds raised would be put into an escrow account in the town's control, and when Nationwide takes completion of construction on 100,000 square feet of office, whatever funds have accumulated in that account would then be transferred to Nationwide, thereby tying any reimbursement directly to the construction of the office environment, which the town seeks to incent to happen. The town will also participate with some initial infrastructure improvements to the corner of Gilbert and Pecos Road to move another use to a better location on the site to set the site up for the Rivulon development. That is estimated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.1 million. And again, the town would not reimburse Nationwide until after the completion of the 120,000 square foot office building. So with that, I'll be more than happy to answer any specific questions in regard to the agreement.
For the council, there was an addendum placed in our Dropbox. In looking at that and talking to Susan, I would say the major item would be to say that there's a legal description that will come later. Other than that, just very minor words here and there that don't have an impact on the agreement. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Let me now look to my right and left of the council. Additional questions that you would have about this? Councilmember Peterson.
It's not quite 20 questions, but it's long.
You get up to 11, I think.
This is the tip of the iceberg, too, because I've been troubling staff for the last week and a half or so. Few of them are pretty easy. Some of them are harder, but what the expected cost of the public infrastructure to be installed by Nationwide, I'm seeing it in the packet as $30 million. So the question I have is, why is the cap for reimbursement at 35?
Yeah, and Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, at one point, there was an estimate of going up to $35 million for the cost of the public infrastructure. Everything at this point are the best construction estimates for that cost. There could be construction escalation costs down the road as the infrastructure continues to get put in, so it may well exceed the $35 million in total infrastructure cost to put in at some point, but they would not be eligible for reimbursement for anything over 35.
In the case that it's more like the 30, they can't exceed that either, can they? So to be the lower of the two, is that correct?
That would be correct, Mayor, Councilmember Peterson. If it's only up to 30, then they'd only be eligible to get reimbursed for up to 30.
And another simpler question. In the economic impact study, are they using fiscal years or calendar years? And I'm sorry, I just didn't get a call back on some of this.
You ask if Dan Henderson, Director of Economic Development, is in the audience, if you could answer that for us, Dan.
I actually care, I know.
Just for the record, would you repeat the question, Councilmember Peterson?
Economic impact studies broken up by years. Is that fiscal years or calendar years?
Calendar years.
Okay. Another simpler question. In the bullet points in the packet, it spells out that taxes on multifamily will not be accessible for reimbursement. Why do we have that in there when multifamily is prohibited?
Multifamily is not currently part of the development. At some future point, if a council were to consider some rezoning for multifamily uses, we want it very specifically spelled out that it would not be eligible for any reimbursement.
Another one that was simpler, I guess. The sales tax, there's an acceleration on the reimbursement for sales taxes on commercial office buildings. I think it's over 2 stories, is that right?
Over 5 stories.
5, I'm sorry. Thank you. What sales taxes are generated by a commercial office building?
There is not, and that's why, Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, that's why we tied the reimbursement of the the transaction privilege taxes to the office construction. The secondary property tax is not eligible for reimbursement. We have no primary property tax, so there's very few taxes generated by commercial office that they would be able to capture, but our goal was to incent them to go as vertical and dense as they could with the office environment, which is why we created an additional incentive to increase the heights on the buildings so that we conserve and maximize the use of whatever space we have in that development to its fullest ability.
So we're talking about the construction sales taxes. Is that what's being
sales
accelerated
taxes,
on that?
Yeah, construction sales taxes, a few other minor taxes.
Okay, thank you. Now I get into my harder questions. The users in this development, will they have the opportunity for incentives? Because we've incentivized, let's say we incentivize the development. What about the users that come in? Is that precluded now, or how's that handled?
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, that would be at the discretion of whatever council that is brought before at whatever point something is brought together. There's nothing to prohibit that in this agreement, but that would be at the discretion of the council.
I wonder if, once we've tapped into that, if there's some user, and sales tax is going to be the incentive, we've kind of used that up on the development rather than users. So I'm just wondering if that makes sense at this stage or not, but I don't know that you can answer that. That's
Right.
More rhetorical, I guess. what about existing and future developments? What competitive advantages are we giving over the existing and future developments?
The Mayor and Councilmember Peterson, specifically what we have discussed and the main impetus, incentive for the town to enter into this agreement with Nationwide is for that commercial office development. The town is underserved for our office needs right now. This will greatly add to our office inventory capacity at full build-out. We've talked about the central business core and our focus on high-wage industries and bringing high-wage industries and employers into Gilbert, and that's a key part of our strategy. We have not adopted a policy to this point, but in our discussions with council, several council members have brought up the potential to develop a policy that any other future developer meeting criteria established by the town, that they be eligible for something along the lines of what's being done for Nationwide as well. I think that is a policy that we should consider establishing. I think it's in the town's long-term interest to bring as much office environment, dense vertical office environment of high quality to our community as we can.
How much should we be able to cut taxes because of this agreement?
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, to answer, and we've had some discussion on this, with this development in particular, I am hesitant to tie anything to it due to the unknown circumstances surrounding the build-out, when it'll build out, the fluctuation in taxes as they go up and down through the years, the actions of our legislature as they may remove eligible taxes or add taxes, that could have a real impact in tying any type of I don't know, I guess you'd almost call it a floating tax race of either raising or lowering taxes as a result of what's generated on this property, which I do not think would be in our best interest to do. I can tell you that the taxes generated from the central business district and from the Rivulon development in particular are going to be key to balancing out our portfolio and diversifying our revenue streams for our community, which are going to allow us to hold the line on taxes and possibly even lower taxes overall as we strengthen those revenue streams and maximize those revenue streams coming in from the central business district.
In general, what is the net loss or gain for residential versus commercial property, including both revenues and expenditures?
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, could you clarify that for me? I'm not sure I particularly follow.
The question is, if you take the town and you look at the residential space versus the commercial space, you look at the cost of serving each versus the revenues that each on average brings in, how do those compare? And I guess the question goes to the larger picture of what combination do we need to be sustainable without new tax revenues? It kind of leads into that larger question.
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, I could not answer that that for you definitively tonight. I could talk in general terms about the services that a residential population needs versus the services that commercial businesses need, but that would even fluctuate by the type of business that is. Offices and office parks in general don't place as high of a demand on services as retail would or a Santan Village Mall would. Residential from a solid waste, from Parks and Recreation, from public safety, have a larger need, place a larger burden on the organization. One of the things that we've talked about and one of the things that has come through with the strategic initiatives that the council adopted is the need to grow our industry base, to grow our job base so that we can grow and stabilize our revenue streams so that we do have a diversified, balanced portfolio to ensure long-term sustainability for all sectors of the community.
I might just insert, we do plan to do some simulations of long-range forecasting of how much office space we need, how much retail and so forth. And is that 2013 sometime?
We are working on that right now, Mayor. We will be doing some modeling and revenue forecasting based on our existing build-out and what we have, as well as our based on land use, what that would look like at build-out. We're working on that for fiscal year 2013.
And you recall a few months ago, we had a comparison with, I think, 5 other cities, and Gilbert had the highest residential, and so if we had to do it over again, we'd probably want less residential.
How long has Nationwide been negotiating with the town related to this particular piece of property?
I believe Nationwide first approached the town roughly 3 years ago. Dan, does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's about right.
About 3 years ago. I know that it began for me almost immediately after joining the town of Gilbert, almost a year and a half ago.
My last question is there a way we can delay this agreement until we can get some of the bigger questions answered? That I think we need to kind of look at the broader picture, figure out what the policy should be. Does this agreement fit within the policy? Does it fit within our sustainability trajectory? Can we offer the same kinds of deals to everybody so that it's fair? So my question is, can we delay this until we can get some of those bigger questions answered?
Sure. Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, it would be my opinion that we should not delay it. I am in full agreement that I would like to develop a policy. That could take some time to put together. This was a very hard-fought negotiation. The project does need to get moving forward, and I would be concerned that it could jeopardize the project that we've negotiated for, and that it could take some time to put a policy like that in place.
It's interesting, I was at GPEC this morning, and it's in a similar way, and I'll use Intel as an example for the state of Arizona. There are various transactions that have occurred in our area that have just caused lights to go off, in a sense, of illuminating Arizona. And this is another one. Many of the business leaders that I was with this morning were very excited about this, commented for Arizona this will be very positive, and they continued to state, as you look at Gainey Ranch, for Gilbert, this will be one of the finest developments that we could have ever asked for. So you've got some great questions. It would seem that with Nationwide finally ready to go and wanting to proceed, that we'd be ready to go too. And I understand some of the bigger questions, but as you heard from Patrick just then, do you feel okay about that, or does that cause you to still have concerns?
Mayor, I'm going to process some of the responses I got, but without the broader policy, and one that I would like to have that it would include a tax cut associated with each of these agreements, without that broader policy and making sure this even fits within whatever that policy would look like, I don't know how this isn't picking winners and losers at some point. If others have ideas and examples of how it's not or why it's not, I'm open to hear that. But that's certainly a large concern I have.
Right. Well, we're definitely picking a winner, and that's Gilbert. Vice Mayor Sens?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple questions. Is there a sales tax on the lease payments that the users would pay for leasing space in these buildings?
Mayor, Councilmember, Vice Mayor Sens, there is currently a lease tax that is assessed between LLCs of related parties. So if you were a building owner as
Right,
well as
I
the
understand
renter, there is a tax on that. There is not a tax between corporations, and that is something that's being discussed, will be discussed at the state legislature this session about removing that tax.
Right. So all the lease payments go directly to Nationwide or whoever the building owner is, and we get no percentage of that whatsoever. That's not in our revenue stream. Is that correct?
Unrelated transactions only. So we would get those revenue streams.
No, you just confused me. If they pay a lease payment to the building owner,
Correct.
is there a tax on that lease payment?
Yes, there is.
There is. Okay, I have not seen that in any of the models, unless I missed it. The other question, in looking at the spreadsheet, the projection was a 95% occupancy rate over 20 years, steady. What is the occupancy rate right now for the 3.1 million square feet of office space in Gilbert?
Mayor, Vice Member Sens, so the question is, what is the commercial vacancy rate in Gilbert?
Or the occupancy, you show occupancy rate in your study, so how does that compare with the existing 3.1 million square feet?
Gilbert is at about a 25% vacancy rate on its commercial office.
So we're at 75%. So what's the surrounding communities running?
Difficult question to answer. There is the vacancy rates or the occupancy rates are sort of bundled into trade area. So within the trade area, we can give you that specific answer. It would take a little bit of research to get the all of Chandler's vacancy rates and all of Mesa's vacancy rates. Are there others that you're looking for besides those two communities?
Well, I'm trying to validate the 95%.
Sure.
And I'm trying to understand now, after what you just told us, how do we justify the difference between this project at 95 and everything else in Gilbert at 75?
Sure. Mayor, Vice Mayor, a couple of answers related to that question. First and foremost, for the economic impact analysis that was performed for you, there was an assumption of an occupancy rate. That assumption of occupancy rate could be factored down to 5%. The fundamental premise behind the around the economic impact analysis is to project what we think the payments will be over time. Quite honestly, a higher vacancy rate yields a quicker turnaround time for the reimbursement related to Nationwide. So if you were to feather that back to say 50%, it would just take longer. Thereby, the way that this agreement is structured over a 20-year period, if you wanted to assume a 50% vacancy rate, our numbers, our payback to Nationwide would actually be better in our favor. So that's point one. And if you want me to model out a couple of different occupancy rates, feathered over time, we'd be more than happy to do that. It doesn't change the payback. It doesn't change the deal. This isn't a better deal for Gilbert at 98% versus 50% versus 75%. Essentially, Nationwide would get paid back quicker, not necessarily anything better for Gilbert. Most important is that regardless of whether this was at 5%, 50%, 75%, or 100%, this deal still passes the state statute test of being more favored to Gilbert than to the developer. So we're giving less away over time. So the other question that you're essentially asking is for the vacancy rates, and I can get you those vacancy rates.
Okay, well, I guess my only concern is to show a steady rate over 20 years.
Sure.
Goes to credibility of your study, and people could question it, and that brings into question a lot of other parts. So,
I take it very differently, and let me just clarify and confirm. To me, the 98% was a conservative approach to numbers, and you could have put 50, you could have put 20, whatever, and so 98% is more of the accelerated return for Nationwide, and thus it would make sense to take a conservative approach of a best case scenario. So I guess I don't have concerns with the 98% because that's a best case scenario, and now we go backwards on it. Councilmember Cooper?
That's the beauty of this agreement. Let's remember how this is set up. The developer is investing a lot of money in the infrastructure up front. The town isn't. In the overall part of the project, there is a piece where we will do some. The beauty of it is it's a payback, or it's really a reimbursement agreement. So if they don't perform, if the developer doesn't perform, too bad for them. I mean, I hope they do. I hope they perform as 100%, because that would be good for Gilbert. But this, whether it's 75% or 95%, that's really more on the developer's side. The infrastructure's in. Gilbert will be receiving the benefits. And that's the way I look at that.
And I appreciate that comment. And if I might, as to the credibility of the study, that was professionally done by a third party. So it wasn't staff that did it. In accordance with state statute, these models have to be run by a third party. So this model was run by Applied Economics. Applied Economics is here today. If you'd like to ask the question of the company that performed the economic analysis and as to the validity of that economic analysis, I'd be more than happy to bring Sarah Murley with Applied Economics up. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Daniels.
Thanks, Mayor. Just actually a couple brief questions. One is, I realize that this agreement has a lot of details, a lot of small writing, if you will, when we talk about contracts. A couple different things on here that I just gave me pause that I'd like to clarify. It says all Gilbert transaction privilege taxes and use taxes. Now, currently, we do not have a use tax in the town of Gilbert. Are we just preparing for the fact that if there ever is in the future a use tax, that it will be included as part of this agreement?
Yes.
Is that why that's written in there? Okay. And then the second part that I had that did give me pause was the annual reporting or semi-annual reporting structure. There isn't a lot of structure to that requirement and to the process. And I think for both predictability and for the town, as far as making the payments back, obviously we won't know until they perform how much we're going to be responding as far as dollar amount. But to have some more structure in the reporting requirements and the agreement, it does say that the owner hereby waives the right to receive any specific tenant transaction privilege revenue information, so that we will be the ones that hold and contain the information and then are delivering back. But there are some reporting requirements for Nationwide to be reporting to the town of Gilbert, and without more structure involved, it does say that we'll be negotiating in good faith, and that if there is a discrepancy, it'll be held in escrow. There's a couple different things, but I'm worried about the time frame. Clearly, they'll want to submit reports to us in a timely fashion so they can get paid in a timely fashion, but it doesn't spell those times out. It just says owner shall periodically submit written reports to Gilbert detailing by taxpayer the amounts paid. So if you could touch on why maybe there isn't as much structure in there, or if there is, if it's identified in another spot.
Okay, Mayor, Councilmember Daniels, I will respond, and then Susan, if I miss anything, feel free to add in. The onus will entirely be on Nationwide to, one, get the release from each one of their tenants so that we can validate and verify individual taxes paid, and then two, the onus is on them to submit to us the full accounting of all taxes received. We will then have the opportunity to verify that. If anything is in dispute, we will notify them per the process, but it really places the onus on them and puts us in a position to validate and verify, and it doesn't put us under any pressure or any timing under the gun to turn things back around to them.
So for predictability purposes, as far as budgeting, I'm thinking of Dawn and Dawn's office and their ability to come up with, as they're establishing budgets, clearly this is a return on what's been collected. Right. Are they required to report to us every 6 months, or is it once a year, or when? I guess I want to keep the dialogue flowing, and I want there to be some predictability when it comes to that.
Sure. Susan, do you want to?
Well, they're not required to report every 6 months. They have every incentive to do that because they don't get reimbursed but for that, and there are some serious reimbursement requirements in terms of documentation. But there is no absolutely requirement. I guess if they wanted to wait a year or two after they have the right to reimbursement, they could.
How much time do we have once we receive their request? How much time do we have before we have to turn around and make payment?
I believe we've agreed that can't remember the exact months, but after they turn it in for that 6-month period, there's 30 days. And they are responsible for getting waivers from their tenants and any other owners within the development area, or we are under no obligation to reimburse.
Councilmember Daniels, with Don here, let me just clarify, because that's a very helpful question. Are we going to be able to anticipate the retail sales tax that's coming in, and you'll know it, and therefore you could, in a sense, have figures prepared that you anticipate that could be turned in with a report?
Mayor and council members, Yes, as a matter of fact, as we look through this, it comes to us in a number of different ways. Now, going back to our agreement with the Department of Revenue, obviously the specific proprietary information about the sales tax that's being collected does need to remain confidential, and we would be able to do so. But because we will have that information available, we'll be aware of the sales tax that's coming into the town. And again, it's sales tax that's being collected by the town, and 50% of it's being remitted back. So because this is a new type of development, new retail that doesn't currently exist within the town, these are new revenues that are coming in. So we're not actually going to be utilizing existing town resources and revenues to be able to remit those payments to the developer. So we'll watch those sales tax numbers as they come in. We'll have a sense of how much that's attributable to that particular development, and we'll know how much we need to remit then moving into the future.
Thank you for those questions. Any other questions? We'll move on. Agenda item number 6 is Heritage Marketplace. And I believe, Patrick, you'll also give a quick overview, and then we'll entertain questions.
Sure. Mayor, members of the council.
And Linda's available too, it looks like.
Okay. The Heritage Marketplace agreement that is before you is a request from an individual who is purporting to buy out Sonoran Capital, who is the current holder of that agreement with the town of Gilbert. That agreement is set to expire in December of 2013 if construction activities does not commence on the site. That developer has come forward with a proposal for a plan and is asking the town to consent to the assignment of ownership to him. The town of Gilbert does not have the ability to unduly withhold that assignment of ownership from Sonoran Capital to the new party. But as part of that, staff used it as an opportunity based on what they've brought forward and what was negotiated for back in 2007 when the Heritage Marketplace was under different conditions, different circumstances, to try to negotiate in on a voluntary basis some better terms and better conditions for the town and for the Heritage Marketplace. I will cap a few of the major changes, and then maybe, Linda, if we can have you just walk us through what the proposed development is, that would be good. On a high level, what the town has done, we have a designed parking structure of 364 spaces with the funding sitting in escrow in a bank that we have not pulled the trigger on. Under the old agreement, the developer of that property had the exclusive right to 250 spaces within that garage. Over a 30-year period, they would contribute roughly $714,000 towards construction and ongoing maintenance for the garage. The town staff feels strongly that the garage should not be tied directly to that developer, that the garage is going to be needed and those spaces are going to be needed for the Heritage Marketplace in general as it continues to build out. It will become a dense urban environment, which much of the parking driven towards the rear of the establishments. So we'd like to have that garage be a true public garage that is open and available to all the patrons of the Heritage District and not have it specifically tied to that individual developer. So that is the single biggest change. The town is still under the obligation to build the garage, and the town, it also doesn't lock us into beginning that garage based on the timing of the agreement. We could start the garage tomorrow if that were the desire of the council. We could move forward on it immediately, but we would need to still construct the garage as part of this. Some other requirements placed on the owner is they have to be under construction with the 2 proposed restaurants by December of next year. If they are not, we are requiring them to put down a $200,000 deposit, which we will hold in escrow. If they are not under construction with the 2 restaurants as proposed by December of next year, the town can keep the $200,000 in escrow, and then there's some additional penalties that would apply that total about $94,000 in total. The restaurants also have to be complete by September of 2014. So we also felt it was in the best interest that there be some additional onus placed on the developer to see this phase 1 proposal come through to fruition with the restaurants. We also left the primary need for exclusive spaces would be for an office user in that general area. we do desire to have an office use in the Heritage District. If the developer should come forward with an office user sometime down the road, then we would be open to negotiating a fair market lease for any spaces that they want to have the exclusive use of. So those are the primary changes at a high level. I would like to reiterate again, though, that the developer has negotiated these voluntarily. He does not have to do this. If we were to go to court, the town could be forced to accept the assignment to the new owner without any of these additional provisions.
So the new owner, in summary, is providing several new advantages for the town. Are there any disadvantages that you see?
Mayor, council, not that I can see. I think it's a much better development for the Heritage District and the town.
Thank you. Other questions and comments before Linda? Councilman Murray.
So Patrick, one of the points you hit on was the $714,000 that the developer would no longer be paying the town, and in return, the town would not be forced to allocate 250 parking spots for them. Do we have a figure that shows what the value of those 250 spots would be? And then it seemed like that would be a financial impact on the project for the good or the bad. And it didn't talk about that as any that, when it modeled out or showed some of the financial impacts, that was not mentioned.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Ray, the $714,000, I believe that broke down, and Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, $500,000 towards construction costs, and then the rest for annual maintenance fees. The garage right now is estimated to cost $6.9 million to construct. 250 spaces would be roughly 2/3 of the garage. So if you just think about the value of the construction, that's probably $4 million in value, $4.5 million in value. They're getting for $500,000. I don't think that's a fair and equitable reimbursement to the town, right, just for construction, to get 2/3 of exclusive use of the garage.
Is there any model that shows how long it would take to get back that $714,000?
In regards to the town no longer getting that from
Correct, so
them.
we'd have to rent these spots out, whether it's to a new business, whether it's to daily patrons who come.
Right.
Do we have any idea how long it would take to recoup those costs?
The intention for a public structure is to not rent it. It's to provide for the overall growth and development of the Heritage District. So I don't know that we look at it as a revenue generating potential for the town. It is public infrastructure needed for a healthy and vibrant heritage district. Now, at some point, if there is an office user, there is going to be a need for exclusive use of spaces, and we would negotiate that fair market lease. We could run some numbers on that, Jordan. I would expect that to be substantially above the $714,000 over 30 years, but we'd be happy to run those numbers for you.
Vice Mayor Sens.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. One thing that may have been lost over time is in the current design, and I don't know if we're talking about changing the design of the parking structure, but the current design contains a workspace for Gilbert Police to have a presence in there. So if they have to go write reports, they can go there without going back to the main station. Plus, then it would provide a presence in the Heritage District. The concern that I talked to staff about today is the timing of the garage. As soon as we put a fence around that property, we've just destroyed a bunch of parking for oregano's. And so that parking structure almost needs to be complete before construction starts on the Heritage Marketplace. And I don't know, has anyone talked to the owner of oregano's about this?
Mayor, Councilmember Sens, we have not. Vice Mayor Sens.
Please note it in the minutes to do that. And the other businesses, but I think that's part of a public meeting, is to have those type of concerns raised, and then we work together in planning solutions. Thank you. Anything else, Vice Mayor Sens, on that? Councilmember Peterson?
In the packet, and maybe you've explained this now, but it says that the commence construction by December 31st, 2013 requirement, and with substantial construction of either Building A or Building B by September 1st, 2014. It's calling that something new. My overall question is, how are the start date requirements changing, both for the development and for the garage?
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, could you restate that? I apologize.
How are the start date requirements changing for both the development and for the garage?
The primary difference is that, and the developer was desiring an additional extension onto the agreement. We told him that we were not opening to doing that. Under the old agreement and the new agreement, construction needs to begin prior to December 31st of 2013. Under the old agreement, though, the maximum penalties for not doing so totaled about $94,000. Under the new agreement, those would total roughly $294,000 to create some extra incentive to get going on the construction.
What about the requirement for substantial completion of the buildings? Is that the same, being September 1st?
Yes.
As before? Okay. It was just a little confusing because we're calling that new, but it sounds like it really hasn't changed. So, okay. My other question was about the value of the land we're selling them. Have we done any kind of a comparable study or anything to get a sense of that $5? I guess that's the same as it was before, and we probably can't do any better now, but I'm just curious how that stacks up.
That is correct, Mayor, Councilmember Peterson. That was negotiated for in the original agreement. We can run some comps in the area, but that was a negotiated price in the agreement.
All right. As a point of curiosity, I'd like to know. This is maybe a broader policy question, I don't know, but is there any thought to opportunity to tighten the nexus between those who benefit from the garage and those who pay for it through this process?
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, do you mean some type of fee for use of the garage, or?
Yeah, maybe. Well, the next question is, who gets to count the garage spaces toward their required parking? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to look at the broader discussion.
Right.
Somebody's going to pay for that garage, and we can charge the guy who lives in South Gilbert who will never maybe use it, or maybe he will, but if he does, he'll come and park there. And so I'm just asking that question.
Sure. Linda, I'll ask Linda to come up and talk about parking in the Heritage District and how that would apply.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. The parking in the Heritage District, we, like our manager just mentioned, is we encourage density and vibrancy in the downtown. So the less parking on site, the better. So with an administrative use permit, parking is permitted on town-owned property within 1,000 feet of the site. Therefore, we fully expect that with different peak hours and different types of uses among retail, office, and many other types of uses, including hopefully someday multifamily, there will be visitors coming and going, shoppers, diners, entertainment. So the 350 spaces in the parking garage will be used throughout the day by different users depending on what they're there for.
Did that answer the question?
It's probably something we're going to have to discuss. If it does become a purely town-owned building, we can decide the policy on who's going to end up paying for it. If we want to have the users pay as they go in, or some other mechanism, but
Sure.
it's a
Just going
discussion
back
we can have.
to the question that Councilmember Ray asked. So the design right now, and could be changed, but the design right now, and it actually has always been that it's a public facility, so it's not planned to be a revenue-generating parking garage. Councilmember Daniels?
I remember having discussions about the parking garage before, but it is going to be wired, and it could be converted to a pay. I mean, all the infrastructure will be there in order to make it a pay-to-park type of facility, but that is, again, not the current plan. I do have one question about the parking garage and how it relates. In the previous agreement, there was an annual fee being paid by the developer for O&M of that parking structure. Is that still included in the agreement if they don't have the dedicated spaces? And what do we anticipate the annual O&M to be on that parking structure?
Mayor, Councilmember Daniels. I'll get you that number. I don't know that off the top of my head. It was roughly $214,000 they would contribute over 30 years, so a very minimal amount in regards to real maintenance of the garage. In staff's opinion, it would be better to not lose 2/3 use of the garage in exchange for such a small amount of money to be applied towards maintenance.
It says in our CIP plan, right, what the total O&M is? I'll race you. Just kidding.
Are you saying, Mark, you're looking it up? Okay. All right. A race. Councilmember Peterson.
Just a last comment on that. We've talked about system development fees as the reason for them is growth paying for itself. I mean, if it doesn't in this case, then I'd like to know why the exception, so.
Mayor, Councilmember Peterson, the Heritage District is a special district. I wouldn't say that the town's efforts to revitalize and reinvigorate that district, on the whole, it required a much heavier investment in infrastructure and rehabilitation than you would find for greenfield development around the community. That's why we've had many discussions about get development right the first time around, because the second and third time is exceptionally more expensive. To create the kind of value that we're looking for out of our Heritage District, we need density. And with density, we're going to need to go to structured parking, which is the entire reason driving the need for a structured parking solution in the Heritage District.
I would just say that if there's a demand for it, I would think the market would pay for the cost of it. So it's a philosophical thing. We can talk more about it later.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other question on 6? Thank you. Let's move to 8. And this is the purchase agreement with Santam Ford. Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, it's actually a really quick question. I noticed that there were other bids done, but I didn't see how they compared. So can you tell us about that?
Mayor, council members, I got prices from several local vendors, 2 local vendors and a couple other dealers, and then the last thing I did was compare the state contract. And the Santan came up with the best price.
I was just curious about by how much, or can you give us a sense?
On the individual half-ton pickups, about $1,000.
And I believe the place we're buying from, half of the sales tax is, we don't capture that, right? So are we including that as in our calculation, the sales tax number?
I didn't include that, the savings in that, so that would be...
So without that half, we're still cheaper with the Santan?
Oh, considerably.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for those questions. Bill, thank you. 22 is next, as far as I could tell, and that's the review of the compensation study. Say that again? Okay. Yes. No, and so Carrie, what the council's asking is, so we don't duplicate, my understanding is that we have requested to have a presentation tonight, which we may not need anything Thursday night. And the reason for today is this is something that's been going on for a long time, and if we have questions, it will help in preparation for Thursday. So whatever is presented today will not be presented again on Thursday.
Mayor, if I could ask a quick question, are we done with agenda review, or are we just doing this next and then there's more agenda review items?
On the consent calendar, that was it.
Okay, so we'll go back to the regular agenda review after we're finished with the presentation.
Well, actually, I was doing the sequential, and after 8, 22 was the next one requested, so did you have anything between 8 and 22?
Is there more after that, is what I was asking.
Oh, okay. 25.
Okay.
So after 22, 25, then I think that's it.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure any necessary staff did not leave, thinking that we were done with agenda review.
Great. So 25, I'd say Jessica, Melanie, good to see you. Yes.
You ready?
Carrie, please.
All right, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Item number 22 is an agenda item for Thursday, and the request is to accept the class and comp study findings that have been provided by Fox Lawson and Associates. This is the next phase as we move the organizational goal forward. So on December 4th, we presented council the findings of the classification study, and so tonight we've got the presentation as it relates to the compensation phase of the study. So with that, we have Sandy Spellman from Fox Lawson, and she'll do the presentation here. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us here tonight, and hopefully we can answer any questions that that come up relative to the compensation study. We're going to go through very briefly a lot of these areas, since I know that as a group you've seen a lot of this material. As you know, Fox Lawson and Associates has been working with the town for several months now, and as you heard in the previous presentation, we've conducted a classification study that has resulted in a recommendation for a class structure of 60 classifications versus the approximate 240 that you have now. Going forward from that, we are going to be making some recommendations relative to the compensation study and the pay structures. I won't reiterate a lot of this stuff, but as you all know, we were using as parameters for the compensation study the strategy and philosophy for the town's compensation system that you all have worked on with my colleagues for a number of months now. And so we have structured all of the recommendations that we make and the statement of findings within that context. So basically, not to belabor anything, but we are looking at a set of comparators that are utilized for the exempt management positions. And again, these relate to the types of organizations that you all may be recruiting and or losing staff to. We use a broader regional focus of those comparators for those higher level jobs, and we use a more metropolitan area focused comparator group for the non-exempt jobs. These are the benchmark jobs that were surveyed, and I know that this has also been discussed in the past, so I won't belabor the fact that using a formal job evaluation system, which we did use with the town, called decision banding, we are obligated under our professional ethics to use as benchmarks at least a third of all jobs in the city to allow us to use that as a representation of the entire class system. Were we not to use a formal job evaluation system, we would be obligated under professional standards to benchmark at least half of the jobs. But in this case, the metric is a third. We developed a survey questionnaire, and that questionnaire was approved by the town, and we then surveyed the cities that you see up there, the local comparators, the regional comparators, and counties. We obviously went to Maricopa County. While Pinal County did not respond to our survey, we were able to data mine their actual range structures. So we do have data from Pinal County. We, of course, followed up with organizations to a significant degree. We asked organizations to provide us data on the work performed by individuals who were matched to our benchmarks, and those matches we asked them to look at from a 70% perspective. We do not report data back on any of the benchmarks that we did not collect at least 5 matches. And again, that's consistent with the standards that we adhere to. All of the data, of course, then was brought forward to a constant point in time, which in this case is August. And we also adjust all data from a geographic point of view back to this metropolitan area. So if we collected data from Henderson, Nevada, and their cost of labor is higher, then we would have subtracted whatever that difference was to make that data appropriate to this metropolitan area. In addition, we looked at private sector data. The survey itself was of public sector comparators, but this is a list of the published source private sector data resources that we accessed where we could to pull data so that we could give you a sense of the private sector impact on the compensation findings. Okay, I'm going to skip through to some of this that makes more sense to get to. On an overall basis, that number that you see there, the minus 12.55%, that's the key number as it applies to the competitiveness or market parity for your non-sworn civilian jobs. That is a comparison of the range midpoint to the actual salaries paid in the marketplace. To the left of that, you see the minus 11.86%. That's a comparison of the actual salaries here in Gilbert versus the actual salaries in the marketplace. So you can see the numbers are not a lot different. One is measuring the pay structure itself, the other is measuring the actual salaries that are paid. For sworn public safety, you see below, we have, as you know, and let me just interject here, as we go through, we use a lot of terms and we talk a lot about the market. We have 2 different job rates we're using for the civilian population versus the public safety population. The job rate for and again, this is consistent with the philosophy you adopted, for the civilian population is the 50th percentile of the market, with the idea that your jobs may range within the 25th to the 75th percentile. For public safety, which is a step pay system, the job rate is the actual maximum of what's paid either here or in the market. So when you're looking at the public safety data, the number on the far right gives you a sense of how off-market you are from an actual salaries paid perspective, but you can see that the range maximums and the minimums for that matter are not far off market. So what that's telling you is that your pay structure for public safety is fairly aligned with the market, but the actual dollars available to the incumbents is what you have to do some consideration of. Okay, here we have numbers that, you can look at that really take us through all of the individual benchmarks and how they differed from the market, both with and without private sector data involved. And understand that of the 50 benchmarks, 23 of them we were able to pull private sector data. So for 23 of them, you're going to see a combination of public sector data and private sector data. For the balance, it is public sector only. This is probably a slide that is fairly irrelevant in truth to your total consideration. What this is telling you is, for those 23 benchmarks where there was private sector data, you can have a great deal of confidence that you're lagging the market, even if you were in a separate pay structure paying those people that you believe you might recruit from both the public and the private sector. So it's a number that shows that you're not as far off market on those jobs looking at private and public together, but it's really fairly irrelevant to your overall consideration of market parity. Okay. My colleague, Lori Messer, went through a number of statistical analyses to come up with what the comparisons are and what the best fit from a pay structure is going to be. And there's a series of graphs included in this report that take you through on a graphical basis what Gilbert looks like versus the market on an actual salaries perspective, what Gilbert looks like relative to the market for range minimums, for midpoints, for maximums, et cetera. And I won't spend a lot of time, but we can always look at those numbers for you. Here we have again, another comparison that takes you benchmark by benchmark, and in those that first set, we have the market actuals that include public and private. Yeah, those are the numbers that are combined public and private, and how that compares to Gilbert. And then you have the comparison to the Gilbert pay ranges and what those differences look like. And again, that's on a benchmark by benchmark basis, and that's what comprises that approximate 12% off market that we talked about earlier. More of the same. Public safety, again, here we're looking at the market maximums as the job rate. So you're going to see that for the actual job rate, which equates to the pay range itself, the public safety differences are fairly small and contained within the plus or minus 5% that we consider appropriate, but where you have problems is with the in-range actual salaries that are paid. Okay, key measures, we keep kind of repeating this 12.55%. That is your off-market number. The 11.86, as we discussed earlier, that's your difference when we look at actual salaries versus the pay structure itself. The numbers that we're throwing out here, and as we make recommendations, we kind of use the rule of thumb that little group at the bottom speaks to, that if you're within 5% either side, we consider you competitive with the market. If you're in excess of 10%, you're competitive, but you're beginning to need to look at what your alignment is. And if you're over 15%, we consider that a recommendation that you should look at doing something because you are misaligned with the market. Okay, sworn. Well, this is just another set of slides that gives you a little more information about the public sector. But as you know, what you're seeing there are the years of service. And what's happening, again, in your public sector pay structure is not that the structure itself is misaligned with the market, but that you have not been moving people through the structure, and therefore the actual salaries are misaligned. Okay, this is what I just said. This is a list of positions that, you know, going back to my comment a minute ago, for those benchmarks where we saw a greater than 15% difference, we are recommending that you take a hard look at those positions because they are significantly misaligned with the market. Okay. There's a misalignment in aggregate of 12.55%, and we are recommending a pay structure that will create, well, hopefully less misalignment moving forward just by virtue of the structure itself, but there are some obviously individual classifications that you need to look at. But we are going to recommend that you move from a box type structure with a 40% range width for every range to a V-shaped structure where your range is as wide as 70% at the executive level down to 40% for those jobs that are very defined. This is a look at what that structure actually looks like. On the far left there, you see a column that's DBM rating. That is the job evaluation rating. That is the system we are using to slot all of the jobs that were not benchmarked. And we are proposing what those actual ranges at each of those levels would be and what that range spread would be. Same thing, well, this is not really the same because the public safety structure is a step structure, but it still gives you a little bit of information relative to what those ranges are in a separate structure. Okay, we're recommending that you look at those jobs that are 50% out of alignment. Based on the preliminary costing, if you were to bring everyone into this new structure and bring them to the 50th percentile of the structure, which we are not actually recommending that you do because your philosophy states that you have a 25 to 75% width to work with. But if you were on average, oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I was shouting. You're going to be looking at 5.1 million. And then 2.6 million to bring the public sector folks to that step that is representative of their years of service. And a detailed cost analysis, of course, is provided separately. But again, we want to just reemphasize that 5.1 figure is what, on average, we think you ought to be looking at to work toward to give you enough flexibility to keep some of your jobs in the second quartile, some of your jobs in the third quartile based upon what makes the greatest sense relative to the needs of the town and the recruiting history. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. This is pay practices. We did survey the organizations we went to relative to pay practices. I'm not going to belabor these, but I will say that based upon what we see out there, we're not making significant recommendations to you relative to pay practice other than to move toward a new shaped pay structure. And relative to benefits, we found you to be competitive with the marketplace. There's a few areas where you're either a little high or a little low, but nothing that stood out to us in our experience as needing to be significantly changed or assessed. Let's see. Well, if you wanted to see. And we do recommend that you update your pay structures annually, and that every 2 to 3 years that you really look at more than indexing your structures, that you actually look at what's been going on in the economy and perhaps conduct a new survey. And?
Thank you. Carrie, do you have anything else before I do a summary?
No, just the last slide here indicates that in the council packet, there are attached benchmark summary data sheets as well as the implementation cost analysis. We will be providing council by tomorrow revised implementation cost analysis based on some calculations that we found. So more information will be forthcoming.
Thank you. The last few days, we have all had opportunities in smaller group meetings to meet with those that conducted the study and our internal HR leadership. And I was in the last group. So I asked some questions, and this is the summary I got. And now in a public meeting, I want to see if I heard correctly that we are anxious as a council to move forward. And to do so, come Thursday night, we could have two things happen, and one would be to accept the study, and two, to ask our HR leadership to move forward and expedite the development of implementation strategies and present those. I think the dates that were talked about, end of February, early March. And as I asked, well, can it be done any sooner? And I heard that others on the council asked that same question, but that is what our HR leadership felt would be an appropriate time frame. So is that a summary of what you saw and heard and what you would like to have happen next, those two things? Councilmember Peterson?
I just had one clarification for the public as well, but on the financial impact under this item, it says that there is one. The reality is there is no financial impact for this item. We're just accepting the report. How we implement it comes later. That's when the financial impact would kick in. So it's kind of confusing the way this is written.
Thank you. So on Thursday night, and it's not that this is a very important study, and it has taken a lot of hours and a lot of effort, and on Thursday night, it's not that I want to not have additional time, but what I would anticipate from the feedback I received is that on Thursday night, this could take 30 seconds. Okay. And we'll hold off then and move to 20. Thank you, Carrie. 25. The reason why I bring up 25 right now, and this could be our Thursday night discussion, realizing that we won't act on it till Thursday night, is that it's potential that Councilmember Ray will not be here Thursday night, and because there were 3 of us on the nonprofit subcommittee, I wanted to make sure you had a chance to share some of your feedback. So I'm going to give a summary, and then I'm going to ask our chair, Councilmember Peterson, if you want to add anything, and Councilmember Ray, as the 3 of us were on the subcommittee, and then Jessica, you're there as our cleanup hitter. What what you see on 25 is, through a lot of time and effort, an answer that is not what we expected, but it would be a recommendation that we do not proceed in accepting the proposal from Gilbert Can from our RFQ. And the summary that I would give is that we were appreciative of Gilbert Can responding to our RFQ, that in a recent meeting, it came down to one of the challenges is that Gilbert Can would be what I would say skilled in operations, in identifying needs, in identifying solutions for social service needs, but not necessarily to have the skill of fundraising, which had much to do with the RFQ. And so it came to an open discussion in the subcommittee meeting where we felt like maybe this was not a good match, and that Gilbert Can could continue to do the services they do now, that we may need to look at other solutions. And so that's the reason for recommending not to proceed. Chair Peterson, anything you want to add to that? Councilmember Ray.
You did a great job, Mayor. I would add my thanks to Gilbert Can and their efforts, and a great group with doing lots of positive things in the community. And although this RFQ didn't work out quite as all had planned, there'll be many opportunities to work with those members in the future and continue to be benefited because of their hard efforts.
Thank you. Jessica, as the cleanup hitter, would you like to add anything? So again, for the council on Thursday night, I would anticipate that that would be about a 30-second discussion, and we can move forward unless you have additional questions or comments you would like to bring up today. Councilmember Cooper.
I appreciate Gilbert Can for their work, and also your team for the work that you did. When are you getting back together, and when are you coming up with the other solutions? My question is really related to the ticking clock as we set a transition plan, and part of my support, or a big part of my support for that transition plan, was that there was going to be another source of funding to make up for that. And so just love to hear what your thoughts are.
We thought we'd get together next year. I think is our next subcommittee meeting in second. Well, it seems like it's January, but I forgot which date. Thank you. That takes us through the agenda item number 1 for the study session. Number 2 was if there were additional discussion items for efficiencies, and we could do that. Otherwise, we might be very close to ending the study session. Thank you. Study session officially ends, and thank you for all of your efforts, and we'll see you Thursday night. Or actually, as a council, we do have a posted public meeting that will take place in the morning at 8 a.m., and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Are you all in school now?